"I've gone too long without a man," the Apache girl said to the lonely rancher. The ranch had been his life for as long as he could remember, stretching over acres of parched land dotted with scattered cacti and dry shrubs. Every morning he woke before the first light, tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and making sure that the few crops he could grow survived the harsh climate. It was a life of routine, of endless work, and of loneliness. The days were long and the nights even longer. Samuel had grown used to the quiet, the absence of voices other than his own, and the constant hum of the wind across the plains. Despite the solitude, Samuel took pride in his work. Every fence he mended, every calf he raised, and every evening he spent repairing tools or sharpening knives felt like a small victory against the vastness of the desert. Yet deep down, he could not ignore the quiet ache in his heart, the longing for someone to share these victories with, someone to sit with by the fire when the day's work was done, someone who could look at the sky with him and not just see dust and heat, but life and hope. But that someone had not yet appeared, and so he continued his routine, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of his days. One late afternoon, as Samuel was walking along the edge of his property to inspect a section of fence that had begun to sag, he noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or some other wild animal, but as the figure grew closer, he realized it was a young woman. She moved with a quiet confidence, each step measured and careful on the uneven ground. Her long, dark hair framed her face, and her skin glowed in the golden light of the setting sun. She carried a small bundle in her arms, wrapped tightly in cloth, and seemed aware of the harshness of the terrain, yet unafraid of it. Samuel stopped in his tracks, unsure whether to call out or remain silent. The woman noticed him as well. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. Not recognition in the sense of knowing each other before, but an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared isolation that life had forced upon both of them. She gave a polite nod, a small, almost shy gesture, and continued along the trail without another word. Samuel watched her go, his curiosity piqued. There was something about her presence, something that felt both familiar and entirely new, that stirred feelings he had long pushed aside. Over the next few days, Samuel began to notice her more often. She was quiet and observant, never lingering too long in one place, yet always appearing at just the right time when he happened to be near. Sometimes she was collecting herbs along the roadside. Other times, she was helping an elderly neighbor carry firewood. Word in the small town nearby was that she was Leela, an Apache woman known for her strength and independence. People admired her courage but also whispered about her solitude, just as they whispered about Samuel S. Both lived on the edges of society in their own ways, each accustomed to walking their path alone. One morning, Samuel encountered Leela while checking on a section of fence that had fallen during the previous night's windstorm. She was kneeling near a patch of wildflowers, carefully examining the soil. "Morning," Samuel said cautiously, not wanting to startle her. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Morning," she replied. There was a pause, filled only with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sound of cattle. Then, as if a decision had been made silently, she stood and offered to help him lift the fallen fence posts. Together, they worked in silence, their movements synchronized by necessity rather than conversation. The physical labor created a connection that words could not yet reach. After hours of work, they finally stepped back and surveyed their progress. Sweat dampened their clothes and the sun had climbed higher into the sky, yet neither seemed to mind. Samuel finally spoke, his voice rough but earnest. "I didn't expect help." Leela shrugged, her eyes meeting his. "I walk by here sometimes. Thought I could lend a hand." There was a simplicity to her words, but Samuel sensed there was more beneath them, a quiet strength, a willingness to reach out despite the walls life had forced her to build. As the days turned into weeks, their encounters became more frequent. Sometimes they would meet while fetching water from the well, other times while tending to animals or repairing fences. Slowly, tentative conversations began to emerge. Samuel would talk about the difficulties of running a ranch alone, about the way the heat could crack the earth, and how hard it was to keep crops alive. Leela would share stories of her life growing up in the nearby Apache community, of the traditions she cherished, and the challenges she faced navigating a world that often misunderstood her. Each story revealed more of their inner worlds, and each revelation deepened the sense of familiarity and trust that was forming between them. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Samuel invited Leela to sit with him by the fire. The ranch had a small, modest cabin where he kept tools and supplies, and the fire was the one small comfort that made the nights bearable. They sat together, not speaking at first, watching the embers glow and listening to the desert wind. It was a quiet companionship, a moment where words were not needed. Eventually, Leela spoke, her voice soft but steady. "It's easier to work when someone is nearby," she said. Samuel nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning. There was a sense of relief in sharing these simple moments with someone who understood, even if only in part, the solitude of the land. Over time, the trust between them grew. Samuel found himself looking forward to her visits, to the quiet companionship of shared labor and shared stories. Leela, in turn, seemed to find comfort in his steady presence, in the way he worked the land with care and patience. There was a rhythm to their interactions, a delicate balance between independence and connection. Neither rushed the other, yet the bond was undeniable, slowly weaving itself into the fabric of their daily lives. Evenings often found them walking together along the dusty paths of the ranch, speaking of small things, the weather, the animals, or the changing seasons. But beneath these casual conversations, there was a growing awareness of something deeper, something that neither had fully named. Samuel began to notice the way Leela's eyes reflected the sunset, how her laugh brought a warmth that the desert heat never could. Leela noticed the quiet strength in Samuel, the way he faced life's hardships with determination and resilience. There was a silent acknowledgement of shared solitude, a recognition that perhaps each had been waiting for the other without even realizing it. As the first signs of spring appeared, bringing small bursts of green to the otherwise dry landscape, their friendship blossomed. Samuel no longer felt the crushing weight of isolation as acutely. Leela's presence brought a sense of hope, a promise that even in a world defined by hardship and distance, connection was possible. And while neither spoke of love or longing yet, the foundation was being laid for something profound. They had begun to fill the spaces of each other's lives that had long been empty, and in doing so, discovered the quiet beauty of companionship. By the end of that first season, Samuel and Leela had formed a bond that went beyond mere friendship. It was a connection born of shared experience, mutual respect, and an understanding that life could be endured alone, but was infinitely richer when shared with someone who truly saw you. As Samuel watched Leela walk along the trail one late afternoon, the golden light catching the edges of her hair, he realized that life on the ranch, once so solitary, now held a new promise, a quiet hope that perhaps the long days and lonely nights were about to change in ways he had never dared to imagine. As the days grew longer and the desert began to show hints of spring, Samuel and Leela's interactions became more frequent and more personal. What had begun as polite nods and occasional help with chores evolved into conversations that stretched from morning light to the golden glow of evening. Samuel found himself sharing more than just the practicalities of ranch life. He talked about his childhood, the way he had learned to care for animals, and the quiet hopes he had carried through the years. Layla, in turn, revealed stories of her family, her ancestors, and the traditions that shaped her identity. These stories were not just words, they were windows into lives shaped by hardship, resilience, and the unspoken strength required to endure a life alone. One afternoon, Samuel was mending a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent windstorm. Leela appeared quietly behind him, carrying a small basket filled with freshly picked herbs and wildflowers. "I thought you might like some help," she said softly, her voice blending with the wind. Samuel looked up, momentarily taken aback by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you," he replied, feeling a warmth he could not explain. Together they worked on the fence, their movements in quiet harmony. There was no rush, no need to speak constantly. The act of working side by side created a connection that words alone could not capture. As the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the dry earth, Leela paused to rest and wiped her brow. Samuel handed her a bottle of water, and their hands brushed for just a moment. Neither spoke, but in that brief contact, there was a shared acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that were slowly growing between them. Leela smiled faintly, a small but genuine expression that made Samuel's chest tighten. It was a smile that carried both courage and vulnerability, a rare glimpse into the heart of someone who had learned to rely only on herself. In the evenings after the work was done, Samuel began inviting Leela to sit with him by the small fire near his cabin. At first, their conversations were simple, observations about the weather, the cattle, or the slow growth of crops. But over time, they began to delve deeper, speaking about fears, regrets, and dreams they had long kept to themselves. Samuel told Leela about the nights he had spent staring at the stars, wishing for companionship, wondering if anyone would ever understand the rhythm of his solitary life. Leela shared the challenges of growing up as an Apache woman in a world that often misunderstood her, the longing for acceptance, and the desire to find someone who could walk beside her without trying to change her. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Leela spoke words that startled Samuel. "I've gone too long without a man," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. Samuel looked at her, his heart beating faster than it had in years. There was no accusation or demand in her voice, only honesty, a simple expression of a need that had been quietly endured. He realized then that he felt the same way, though he had never dared to admit it. The loneliness they had both known for so long was not just about solitude. It was about the absence of someone who could understand, support, and share in the small joys and hardships of life. From that moment, their relationship began to shift subtly. There was a new awareness in their interactions, a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer just friends or neighbors, but two people discovering the possibility of companionship. Samuel found himself anticipating Leela's visits, feeling a sense of relief and excitement whenever she appeared. Leela, too, seemed lighter in spirit, her smiles more frequent, her laughter more genuine. Together, they navigated the simple pleasures of life on the ranch, the sound of water trickling in the trough, the smell of freshly tilled soil, the warmth of the sun on their faces. Despite the growing closeness, both Samuel and Leela were careful. They respected each other's independence and understood the importance of patience. Neither wanted to rush what was naturally unfolding between them. Samuel admired Leela's courage and strength, her ability to move through the world with grace and determination. Leela respected Samuel's steadfastness, his quiet wisdom, and the way he faced life's challenges without complaint. There was a balance to their connection, a sense of mutual respect that made their companionship feel both natural and comforting. One afternoon, while tending to the cattle, a sudden dust storm swept across the plains. The wind whipped fiercely, scattering debris and making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Samuel called out to Leela, and they quickly moved to shelter behind a small hill. As they huddled together, shielding themselves from the swirling dust, Samuel realized how much he relied on her presence. The fear of the storm was eased simply because she was there, standing beside him. Leela looked at him with steady eyes, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. Their bond was evident in the quiet strength they drew from each other. After the storm passed, they spent the rest of the day repairing fences and tending to the cattle, working with a renewed sense of purpose. The shared experience reinforced their connection, showing them that life's challenges could be faced more confidently when met together. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the plains, they walked side by side back to the cabin. Their conversation was light, filled with laughter and small observations about the land, yet beneath the simplicity lay a deepening understanding of each other's hearts. As spring progressed, the desert began to bloom, and the ranch slowly transformed from a harsh, dry landscape into a place of life and hope. Samuel and Leela's bond grew stronger with each passing day. They began sharing meals, preparing food together, and even teaching each other small skills. The art of herbal remedies from Leela, the careful tending of livestock from Samuel. In these moments, they discovered not only companionship but also friendship, trust, and respect. Each learned from the other, and each found joy in the exchange. One evening, as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky, Samuel realized that he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before, a sense of anticipation for the future, a hope that life could hold more than solitude and labor. Leela, sitting beside him, noticed the change in his demeanor. "You seem different," she said softly. Samuel smiled, a quiet expression of contentment. "I feel different," he admitted. "Life feels possible now." Leela nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant. For the first time in years, they both allowed themselves to imagine a life that included each other, a life where the burdens of loneliness were eased by companionship and shared purpose. Despite the comfort they found in each other, Samuel and Leela continued to face the realities of life on the ranch. Work was demanding, and the desert remained unpredictable. But the presence of someone who cared, someone who shared the labor and the small triumphs of each day, made even the hardest tasks feel lighter. They discovered that the true value of companionship was not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet, steady support that made life more bearable, more meaningful, and more joyful. By the end of the spring season, Samuel and Leela had formed a bond that was both resilient and tender. They had learned to navigate the complexities of human connection, trust, vulnerability, patience, and mutual respect. The loneliness that had once defined their lives was gradually replaced by a quiet joy, a sense of belonging that neither had thought possible. And though they had not yet spoken of love, the foundation was being laid for a relationship built on understanding, empathy, and shared experience. As Samuel watched Leela walk along the trail one late afternoon, carrying a basket of herbs with the sun illuminating the edges of her hair, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life on the ranch was still hard, still demanding, but it no longer felt empty. There was a new warmth in his heart, a recognition that the most unexpected encounters, like the one with the young Apache woman who had quietly entered his life, could bring profound change. Leela, for her part, felt a similar sense of comfort and hope. She had long endured life on her own, navigating the world with courage and resilience, but now she realized that sharing her journey with someone who respected and understood her was not a weakness. It was a gift. And so, as the desert stretched endlessly around them, Samuel and Leela continued to meet, to work, and to talk. Each day strengthened their connection, revealing the depth of their compatibility and the possibilities of a shared future. The foundation they were building was slow, careful, and deliberate, but it was strong. Both had learned that true companionship was not a matter of haste or convenience. It was a matter of presence, understanding, and the willingness to walk side by side through the challenges and joys of life. As the warmth of spring gradually gave way to the heat of early summer, Samuel and Leela's bond continued to grow. They had spent months working side by side, sharing stories, and enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's presence. Yet, as their connection deepened, they began to face challenges that neither had fully anticipated. Life in the small town nearby and the vast desert that surrounded the ranch had a way of testing even the strongest relationships. Whispers began to spread among the townspeople, murmurs fueled by prejudice and misunderstanding. Samuel, long accustomed to solitude, found the scrutiny uncomfortable, while Layla, used to navigating a world that often judged her identity, felt the sting of assumptions and gossip. One afternoon, Samuel was tending to the cattle when a neighbor approached him with a cautious expression. "I hear you've been spending a lot of time with that Apache girl," the man said, lowering his voice as if speaking too loudly might summon trouble. "Are you sure that's wise?" Samuel felt a flush of irritation but kept his voice steady. "We're just helping each other with the work," he said simply. The neighbor shook his head, unconvinced, and left. Though Samuel tried to dismiss the encounter, he could not ignore the unease it stirred within him. Leela had become more than just a companion in labor. She had become someone whose opinion mattered, someone whose presence brought him a quiet happiness he had not known in years. And yet, the judgment of others loomed, threatening to cast shadows over the connection they were carefully nurturing. Leela, too, felt the weight of the town's whispers. She had long learned to navigate life with strength and dignity, but the subtle glances and hushed comments were difficult to ignore. One evening, as she and Samuel sat by the fire after a long day of work, she spoke of her concerns. "People don't always understand," she said quietly. "They see what they want to see, not what is real." Samuel listened, understanding the frustration that came with being judged unfairly. "We know the truth between us," he said firmly. "Let them think what they want. It doesn't change who we are." Leela smiled faintly, grateful for his words, yet the discomfort lingered. Their challenges were not limited to the opinions of others. As their relationship became more personal, differences in temperament and approach to life began to surface. Samuel, steadfast and methodical, sometimes struggled to understand Leela's independent spirit and her occasional need for space. Leela, confident and self-reliant, occasionally felt that Samuel's quiet pride made him distant or unapproachable. One afternoon, while working on repairing a fence, a disagreement arose. Samuel suggested a method to secure a post, and Leela, trusting her instincts, proposed a different approach. Their voices grew sharper than usual, tension building as neither wanted to appear wrong or incapable. Finally, Leela stepped back, frustration evident in her eyes. "I just think there's a better way," she said, her voice calm but firm. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I've done this a certain way for years," he replied. "It works." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Both realized that pride and independence, qualities they admired in each other, could also create barriers when left unchecked. The moment passed without a resolution, leaving both with a sense of unease. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, Samuel sat alone on the porch, reflecting on the day's events. Leela had returned to her small home in the nearby woods, and the quiet of the ranch felt heavier than usual. He understood that their disagreements were not signs of incompatibility, but rather reminders that connection required patience, understanding, and compromise. He thought of the first time he had met Leela, her quiet confidence, and the warmth she had brought into his life. The memories gave him hope that they could navigate the challenges ahead, as long as they approached them with honesty and care. The following day, a sudden rainstorm swept across the plains. The skies darkened rapidly, and the wind picked up, turning the flat landscape into a chaotic scene of flying debris and mud. Samuel realized that some of the cattle were at risk of wandering into unsafe areas. Without hesitation, he set out to round them up, and to his relief, Leela appeared at the same time, ready to help. Together, they worked tirelessly, guiding the frightened animals to safety, their previous disagreements forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The storm forced them to rely on one another completely, reminding them that their connection was not only emotional but practical, rooted in trust and teamwork. As the storm cleared, Samuel and Leela surveyed the ranch, exhausted but relieved. The event had reinforced their bond, highlighting the strength that came from facing challenges together. "I guess we make a good team," Samuel said, offering a small smile. Leela returned the smile, her eyes reflecting both pride and warmth. "We do," she agreed. The storm had been a test, a reminder that life's difficulties could be weathered when faced with cooperation and mutual respect. Despite the trials they faced, moments of tenderness continued to emerge. Samuel began to notice the little things about Leela, the way she laughed when something genuinely amused her, the care she took in preparing meals, the quiet patience she displayed when working with animals. Lila, in turn, appreciated Samuel's unwavering dedication to the ranch, his quiet wisdom, and the way he listened without judgment. They began to anticipate each other's needs, whether it was offering water after a long day in the sun or lending a hand with a stubborn calf. These small acts of consideration deepened their connection, building a foundation of trust that would sustain them through future challenges. However, even as their bond strengthened, the shadows of misunderstanding lingered. One evening, a neighbor's careless remark threatened to stir doubt in Leela's mind. "Be careful," the man said, glancing towards Samuel. "Not everyone would treat a woman like you the way you deserve." Leela felt a familiar tension rise in her chest, a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. She wanted to trust Samuel completely, but the outside world constantly reminded her of the challenges that came with being seen as different. That night, as she walked back to her home, she reflected on her feelings, realizing that navigating trust and vulnerability was as difficult as any physical task on the ranch. The next day, Leela approached Samuel with honesty. "I worry," she admitted softly, "not about us but about what people think, what they expect." Samuel took her hands in his eyes steady and reassuring. "Let them think what they will," he said. "We know the truth. That is what matters." His words brought comfort, but Leela understood that building trust required continued effort and patience from both of them. They spent the rest of the day working together in quiet harmony, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger with each shared task. Over time, Samuel and Leela realized that challenges were not obstacles to their relationship, but opportunities to strengthen it. Each disagreement, misunderstanding, or external pressure became a lesson in patience, empathy, and communication. They learned to express concerns without anger, to listen without judgment, and to compromise without losing themselves. Their connection became a delicate balance of independence and interdependence, each learning to navigate their personal boundaries while embracing the support offered by the other. As summer approached, the heat intensified, and life on the ranch demanded more effort. Yet even in the sweltering sun, Samuel and Leela found joy in simple routines, repairing fences, tending to crops, gathering firewood, or sharing meals in the shade. They discovered that true partnership was not about grand gestures, but about presence, reliability, and the small acts of care that made everyday life more manageable. Each day reinforced their growing bond, a quiet affirmation that the hardships of life were more bearable when faced together. One late afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow across the plains, Samuel and Leela sat together on a fallen log, catching their breath after a long day's work. Leela looked at Samuel with a mix of curiosity and affection. "Do you ever wonder if it could be different?" she asked. Samuel considered the question, reflecting on the months they had spent together. "Different how?" he replied. "I mean, if life wasn't so hard, if people weren't so quick to judge." Leela smiled softly, understanding that his quiet strength allowed him to see the world with a perspective she sometimes struggled to maintain. "I think it could be better," he said finally. "With you, at least, it already is." The trials they had faced, the misunderstandings, the external judgments, and the occasional disagreements, had not weakened their bond. Instead, they had made it more resilient, showing them that true companionship was forged not in the absence of conflict, but in the willingness to face it together. By the end of that summer, Samuel and Leela had learned that life would always bring challenges. But they also knew that together, they could meet them with courage, patience, and understanding. Their relationship had been tested in many ways, yet it had emerged stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and a deep emotional connection. The hardships of the desert, the judgments of others, and the occasional misunderstandings had all served to reveal the depth of their commitment to one another. As they walked back to the cabin that evening, the warm breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and dry earth, Samuel and Leela knew that their journey was far from over. Yet for the first time in years, both felt a quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The trials of life, rather than driving them apart, had drawn them closer, showing them that love, friendship, and partnership were not simply about comfort. They were about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to grow together, even when the world seemed determined to challenge them. As summer gradually softened into early autumn, the landscape around Samuel's ranch transformed. The harsh sun that had dominated the plains gave way to cooler mornings, and the golden light of evening painted long, gentle shadows across the land. Samuel and Leela had weathered months of challenges together, storms, disagreements, and the whispers of judgment from the town. Yet, through it all, their bond had grown stronger, more resilient, and more comforting. Life on the ranch was no longer just a daily struggle. It had become a shared journey, one filled with purpose, care, and the quiet joy of companionship. The mornings began with their familiar routine. Samuel would wake before dawn, walking among the cattle to ensure they were safe and calm. Leela would join him, carrying a small basket for collecting eggs from the hens and herbs from the garden they had started together. The air was crisp, filled with the subtle scent of soil and dew, and the quiet of the morning gave them time to reflect and speak freely. They often shared their thoughts about the day ahead, discussing which fences needed repair, which crops required extra attention, and what tasks they could do together. These conversations were practical, yet they carried an underlying intimacy, a shared understanding that their lives were increasingly intertwined. Over time, Samuel began to notice the small details that made Leela unique, details that went unnoticed by others in the town. The way she carefully examined the soil before planting, the patience she showed with the animals, and the quiet determination in her movements. All these traits spoke of a woman shaped by resilience and a deep connection to the land. Leela, in turn, admired Samuel's steadfastness, his ability to remain calm in the face of challenges, and the way he approached each day with a sense of duty and care. They had become more than companions in work. They had become partners in life, learning to anticipate each other's needs and support one another in ways that words alone could not capture. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence that had been weakened by recent rains, Leela paused to wipe sweat from her brow. "It's amazing how far we've come," she said softly, her eyes scanning the expanse of land they had worked together to maintain. Samuel looked at her, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yes," he agreed. "It's not just the land that's changed, it's us too." His words carried a weight of meaning that went beyond the obvious. They had both grown through the shared labor, through the challenges they had faced, and through the trust they had cultivated. Their relationship had evolved from cautious friendship to something deeper, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. As the days passed, their companionship became a source of inspiration not only for themselves, but also for those around them. Neighbors who had once whispered or judged began to notice the strength and harmony between Samuel and Leela. They saw two people who worked together tirelessly, who treated each other with respect, and who faced life's challenges as a team. Slowly, acceptance began to replace suspicion. Even those who had doubted the connection now recognized that it was genuine, rooted in honesty, trust, and shared values rather than fleeting attraction or convenience. Despite the growing acceptance, Samuel and Leela remained mindful of their independence. They understood that a healthy relationship was not about losing oneself in another, but about complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through weaknesses. Samuel continued to maintain the ranch with the dedication he had always shown, while Leela brought her knowledge of the land, her cultural wisdom, and her unique perspective to their shared tasks. Together, they created a rhythm that balanced work and rest, responsibility and enjoyment, solitude and companionship. Evenings on the ranch became moments of quiet reflection and warmth. After the day's work was done, Samuel and Leela would sit by the fire, sometimes talking about the day, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. The stars above stretched endlessly across the sky, and the soft sounds of the desert, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the low murmurs of the cattle, provided a soothing backdrop. These moments allowed them to reconnect, to share feelings and thoughts that had accumulated over the course of the day, and to appreciate the simple joys of life. One particularly beautiful evening, Leela turned to Samuel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. Samuel considered the question carefully, looking out over the plains that had been his home for so long. "I do," he replied slowly. "I think about what it could be like with someone by my side, sharing this life." Leela's eyes softened and she smiled. "I've thought about it too," she admitted. "I've gone long enough without someone to share my days with, and I think I want that life with you." Samuel felt a warmth spread through him, a mixture of relief, joy, and deep affection. In that moment, all the trials, misunderstandings, and uncertainties of the past months seemed to fall away, leaving only the clarity of shared desire and mutual commitment. Their bond deepened further as they began planning small improvements to the ranch and their lives together. They planted a small orchard, choosing trees that would provide shade and fruit for years to come. They repaired old fences, added storage for supplies, and even painted the cabin where they spent many quiet evenings. These tasks were more than just practical improvements. They were symbols of their shared future, tangible expressions of the life they were building together. With each project, their connection grew stronger, and their sense of partnership became more tangible. Over time, Samuel and Leela also began to explore the surrounding areas together. They walked along trails that meandered through the hills, discovering hidden springs, quiet groves, and scenic overlooks. These excursions brought them closer not only to the land but to each other. They shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection, finding joy in the simplicity of nature and the richness of companionship. Every step along these trails was a step in their journey together, a reminder that life's beauty was amplified when shared with someone who truly understood and appreciated it. As autumn arrived in full, the ranch transformed with the season. The once parched land now bore vibrant hues of red, orange, and gold, and the crisp air brought a sense of renewal. Samuel and Leela worked side by side, harvesting crops, tending to the animals, and preparing the land for the cooler months. Each day was filled with labor, yes, but also with laughter, conversation, and the quiet satisfaction of shared accomplishment. Their relationship had become a source of strength, a steady presence that helped both navigate the challenges of life with courage and hope. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the distant hills, Samuel reached for Leela's hand. "We've come a long way," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. Leela squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We have," she agreed, "and I wouldn't want to walk this path with anyone else." In that moment, words were not necessary to convey the depth of their feelings. The connection they had forged through months of shared labor, trust, and understanding spoke more loudly than any declaration could. With the changing seasons, Samuel and Leela also began to consider the future more deliberately. They talked about expanding the ranch, improving the living spaces, and ensuring that the land could sustain them for years to come. They dreamed of raising a family, of sharing traditions and knowledge, and of creating a home filled with warmth, love, and resilience. Each plan was discussed with care, respecting each other's wishes and aspirations, and reinforcing the sense of partnership that had become the foundation of their lives. As winter approached, the first chill of the season reminded them that life was ever-changing. Yet they faced the future with confidence, knowing that their bond had been tested and strengthened by months of challenges and triumphs. The hardships they had endured, storms, misunderstandings, external judgments, had not weakened their relationship. Instead, they had solidified it, teaching them patience, empathy, and the importance of trust. Samuel and Leela had discovered that true companionship was not simply about shared comfort, but about resilience, understanding, and the willingness to grow together through all of life's seasons. By the end of the year, Samuel and Leela had created a life together that was rich with meaning. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now thrived as a home filled with companionship, purpose, and hope. They had learned to balance independence with interdependence, to navigate challenges with patience, and to celebrate the small joys that each day offered. Their story was one of perseverance, mutual respect, and the quiet triumph of love built on trust and shared experience. As they sat together one final evening under the vast expanse of stars, Samuel reflected on how far they had come. From the first cautious encounters along the trail to the deep connection they now shared, their journey had been filled with growth, understanding, and resilience. Layla, sensing his thoughts, leaned her head gently on his shoulder. "We've built something special," she whispered. Samuel nodded, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Yes, we have. And it's just the beginning." Together, they had transformed the challenges of solitude into opportunities for connection, creating a partnership that was not only enduring but deeply fulfilling. Their story became a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and the human capacity to find companionship and love even in the most unexpected places.